I think half of that group of 18 people thought that Discord was a fucking horrible idea. One of the employees quit through Post-it note. When I started it, I was like, if we get the whole market, we'll have 100 million monthly actives. That would be like complete slam dunk, game over, we win.
Jason Citron is the co-founder of Discord. In this speedrun session, Jason walks through the tough pivot from making games to making a communication platform, the early days of building Discord, and what it really takes to lead through times of uncertainty.
Jason's worked on multiple companies, but one of the most interesting aspects of Discord is that famously this company actually started out as Hammer and Chisel, which was building a game called Fates Forever, and then pivoted, later. So we want to kind of go back in the time machine and actually just zoom in on that exact decision to pivot. What did you see? How did you decide? And so yeah, tell us about kind of the earliest days.
Yeah. So fuck ups, huh? Well,
no, you're doing pivoting. I was doing
you were doing the fuck ups.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, see, the thing about pivots is they feel like fuck ups. Actually, people talk about pivoting, maybe you'll pivot. It's not fun at all to go through those kind of experiences, because the lived reality of going through a pivot is that you've just spent some amount of time pouring your heart into building some product and it's not working, and coming to the realization of that, and then thinking about now what? It actually emotionally was very hard. If you have clear eyes and you see what's actually happening around you, though, you can learn a lot from failure and think about how do what do you do from there. So while we built this game and launched it in 2014 called Fates Forever, it was kind of like a competitive multiplayer game on iPad, 3 versus 3 team-based game. For a variety of reasons, it didn't work. But the plan for the company from the original sort of founding when I started it was to actually build a chat app for gaming. And the thought was that we would bootstrap the social network through a game and not actually go to market directly with the chat app. So we built the game, and we had voice and text chat built into it, team play. We actually built a forum, custom forum that was integrated with the game that had a lot of community activity. And when the game didn't work, what we realized was kind of a couple things. One is that we noticed some things about how people were organizing around our game and what apps they were using and how they were cobbling together mass market communication apps to talk with their friends and maintain their sort of guilds across game sessions. And then that made us notice our own behavior using things like Skype and TeamSpeak at the time and how we played games ourselves. We're thinking about okay, what do we do next? Do we try to make a game again, or do we, is there a path to go directly to market with a communications app? And ultimately, we saw a path to just launch a chat app directly that we didn't have to bootstrap it with a game, and that became Discord. So it was a pivot, but it was within the umbrella of our search space.
Was it obvious that you had to work on something else, or was it, why not actually just continue to work on Fates Forever, at that point?
It was obvious that Fates Forever was not going to become a big enough game to bootstrap the network. Because we could look at the retention numbers and the growth rates of it, and while we had a loyal and really engaged kind of super fan group in there, we had the 1,000 true fans kind of vibe going, but it was pretty clear that it was not a straight shot to get to the next sort of step of the master plan. We were actually working on an iteration of Fates Forever to bring it, because it was on iPad, to bring it to smartphones and simplify it a little bit. When one of my teammates started, initially had the sort of thought about just launching a chat app, and we were debating these different paths, I just had this sense the game could possibly work, but it's we still have to get the game to work, which is hard, and then bootstrap the network. And there was actually a path to go to market with the chat app. And as a user of those products, I was just I feel like this is probably going to work, and I guess it did.
Sometimes it's just that easy.
I mean, it wasn't a straight line either, but
well, no, it's so interesting because I've seen companies kind of hit that point, and there's kind of various strategies. You know, sometimes they hedge. I know, for example, the Odeo guys, before they built Twitter, I think my understanding of the story was they actually set up 3 or 4 Tiger teams that worked on a couple different ideas, and Twitter happened to be Jack Dorsey's idea, and then they kind of brought people together. There's folks where the Slack story, which also started out as a browser-based MMO. They were really clear what they wanted to do. And so I'm curious why not have a team that works on Fates Forever and also a new incubated thing, and did that happen in parallel at all, or did you just try to do a hard cut?
No, it did happen in parallel for a hot minute. we spent a year after I realized that Fates Forever in its form wasn't going to make it until we fully committed to Discord from those 2 moments. After we realized the game wasn't going to make it, and which happened after trying 2 or 3 different things of like, maybe we can make it work.
Right.
And I just kind of realized, like, we've got more ideas, but like they don't feel like the kind of thing that's going to, dramatically change the fate of the title. 9 months through that process, we spun up a small team that was working on Discord. That was early 2015, and basically January. What ended up happening for us was, as we were working on it, like, we were an 18-person startup at the time, and so I had an engineer working on Discord, and then I joined it. I'm an engineer, and then I put the 3rd engineer, and then the 4th engineer, and then within like 60 days, we got to a place where all the engineers were building this chat app, and all my designers, the artists, were making a game in Unreal, and I was like, this is stupid. Like, we're a Series A startup. We can't be making 2 crazy bets.
Right.
I was like, I have to pick one, like, or we're just gonna fail.
Right.
So I was like, let's pick Discord. But at the time, Discord had 5 DAU.
Right. Right.
like it was all like us.
Yeah.
And like my friends were like, this is cool, but like they didn't use it because it kept crashing and like it was breaking. But it sort of like had you could tell it was something in it.
Yeah.
And after we kind of burned the boats and went full Discord, like 4 weeks later, we figured out how to make it work. So the focus of leaning into it was a big deal.
Yeah. Like from a team standpoint, how do you manage just the morale of like, moving people through this pivot?
I just tend to default to just being honest with people. Like, if you're joining an early stage startup, it's kind of because you're self-selecting into the mess. It's a little bit,
right.
And so I always felt that being honest with people and bringing them along the journey and involving them in the decisions and getting their input was the best way to like get the best ideas and also to get the most buy-in. Now, with that said, I think half of that group of 18 people thought that Discord was a fucking horrible idea.
Right.
Like literally, they were like, this is the dumbest thing ever. TeamSpeak is amazing. I don't want to, like, it's never going to work. And the day that I decided we're going to work on Discord, actually the next morning, one of the employees quit through Post-it note. Like literally, I came in, and at his desk was his MacBook closed, and there's a blue Post-it, and lunchtime, I'm like, where's Pete? I forget his name. And I go over to his desk.
He knows his name. Let's be honest.
Yeah, I got the whole story.
But how dumb does that guy feel?
I don't know. I haven't asked him since then. But last time I talked to him was through a Post-it. I got to this desk, and there's literally a blue Post-it note stuck, which is like, I quit. I wanted to make video games. And I was like, huh. All right, that sucks. And I felt like offended. I was like hurt. I was like, oh man, he doesn't trust me. He doesn't believe. It was one of those like founder moments where I was like, oh, shit. Right. But now I suppose maybe he was like, yeah, maybe I should have stayed, or maybe he's thrilled. Maybe he actually like got I don't know. Maybe he worked on some great games and he's super happy. Whatever. Yeah. So it was challenging. We did get to a point pretty quickly where I realized like we had a bunch of artists. They weren't going to help, so I had to lay off a third of the company, which was really hard. And these were all amazing, skilled professionals. So they were grown-ups about it, but it was emotionally, that was actually one of the hardest things I've ever done over the whole 13 years of the company. And then we had a smaller team, but even then when we had the smaller team working on it, like still half the group was like, this is not gonna work.
Right.
And there's one guy who's still at the company who, I also won't name his name, who I know was looking for a job and told me as much.
Right.
And then like things started to work and he was like, okay, I'll stay. I don't know what the lesson is from that. Maybe like it's hard. People are gonna quit. It's gonna be difficult. But if you have, you have to have conviction in yourself and trust, faith in yourself, and you push through, and then maybe ultimately winning gets people to stay and come.
Yeah.
At some level.
Well, I always feel, it's one of the amazing and also horrible things about, having a startup in the Bay Area is I think the average tenure of a software engineer here is like under 18 months or something like that. And so it's a hyper liquid efficient market. So it's like if you're winning, all the talent comes your way, and if things aren't working, people kind of, they know, they have metrics dashboards, and they can pull up Looker or Mixpanel or whatever, like they know what's going on.
I think it's also exacerbated if you're working on something that is kind of the thing du jour. Because if you're like, and I don't mean to shitpost anybody here, but if you're like, I'm working on an AI thing.
Yeah, that's like half the audience.
Yeah, I know. The problem with that is, so we're 50 other people.
Right.
Right. So if people are really excited about AI technology, like why are they at your startup as opposed to some different startup? Now, one of the things that we benefited from, which is why I think, even though like some people were looking for jobs and didn't believe in it, people still stayed, is because we were in this interesting sort of cross-section where we were working in the gaming space, but not making video games. And some of the people who were passionate about games, but maybe not qualified to work on video games or didn't want to take the risk of working on video games, would choose to work at us at Discord. So we had like pretty unique mission differentiation. And I actually think to this day, that's why someone would select to come work. I mean, of course, the company's doing well, all that good stuff. But like the people who we love to meet in our interview process, they're people who select to come work at Discord because they love the mission of the company. And those people tend to stay a really long time because if you want to work in tech and you like games, there's not actually a lot of places to go.
Right.
But if you just want to like go work at the company with the latest up and to the right chart, then of course you have a million choices, and we see higher churn for those folks. But one of our we're big enough now to have like values. I wouldn't spend time making like a values chart. Like their values are just like what the four of you are doing, and at some point you got to write it down. But you sort of need to like reverse engineer it at some point. But anyway, our first one, we haven't called it this because it's a little bit spicy, but we talk about it as giving a shit. It's about our customers and the problems. And so like if you fall in love with our customers and our mission and why we're doing what we're doing, I find that people show up with more energy. They are willing to work harder, and they act like owners. Nothing is someone else's problem, and they tend to stay longer.
Walk us through kind of just the initial insight for why people will use this instead of TeamSpeak and Skype and some of the other things where people are kind of trying to hodgepodge. What was the original insight?
There were a couple of them, and I think it was one of those moments where I think the products that people had chosen to use, like TeamSpeak, and there was a whole category of these channel-based communications apps that were made for gaming, like Mumble and TeamSpeak and Ventrilo, and if you know, you know. If you don't know, you're like, what are you talking about? But they sort of have like the Discord Slack channel vibe. Comes from that sort of like tech tree of products. They were never very, very mass market, but they were really, really adopted pretty heavily by core gamers. And then the other sort of pillar of app was like Skype. It was like the mass market communication stuff. Or in 2015 era, like some of the mobile stuff was starting to become used, but none of the mobile products were really great on PC, and a lot of multiplayer game happens on PC. The insight was really realizing that both of these products were not serving the gaming market effectively in a variety of like specific features that when you add them all up, there's like a 10x gap in quality. So I'll just rattle a couple off. So like TeamSpeak and that sort of type of app, oftentimes you have to pay for it. So you have to go and the way it works is you actually go rent a cloud computer. So you go to some cloud provider on some janky website, give them your credit card, and pay money to have slots for people to come and hang out on your server. And then when you want them to join, you have to send them an IP address. It's like a number, sometimes a password attached to it. But before they could even use it, they have to go download a application to their computer, and then they're not compatible with each other. So like if you have your group on TeamSpeak, and then you're short one person, but you're doing a raid in WoW, and you happen to meet someone in game and they have Ventrilo, they have to go download another desktop app. It's like it's a pain in the butt. And then most of those apps didn't have mobile apps in 2015.
Yep.
So if you wanted to talk to those people when you were away from the computer, you couldn't really do it. So a bunch of stuff there. And then on the Skype side, there were a bunch of issues in how it worked that weren't compatible with gaming. Like if you were playing a full screen multiplayer game and you got a Skype call, it would minimize your game and pop up a modal being like, Andrew's calling you, and you're like, that's fine, I'll answer later. Like now I just died. Like so,
right.
People like didn't like that. If you wanted to have a group call, you couldn't have different channels and rooms. You only had one group, like a group DM. It would leak your IP address, which is sort of a weird thing because gamers are a bit of a snarky bunch.
Right.
So we would hear stories, especially from like Twitch streamers, where they would get a Skype notification that would show up on their Twitch stream, and their Skype name would show up on the screen. And if you just knew someone's Skype name, you could get their IP address through the system because of the way Skype was built. And then people would like DDoS their home computer. And so we heard stories of like influencers who like had their home internet being DDoSed, and like they couldn't get Comcast to change their IP address, so they couldn't use their internet at home for like a week until Comcast rolled their IP address. And so you stack, I have like 20 of these things. So you stack them all up, and you basically have a situation where there's a consumer base that is super passionate, tech savvy, early adopters that are being underserved by complacent companies or companies that are just not focused on them, and then we just had an in. So it was kind of that plus some technology shifts with WebRTC becoming popular in the browser allowed us to, like, the year that we launched Discord was the year WebRTC went big in the browser. That was a big innovation too that allowed us to reduce the friction in sort of interoperability. Anyway, there's a lot of stuff, but does that answer the question?
Yeah, no. I think it's great. I mean, it's so interesting too, because I mean, one of the things we often end up talking about is sort of like, to what extent does the novelty of the idea help or hurt, these things, and it's often really good to have some kind of a blueprint for, like TeamSpeak, and where you can be, it's kind of working, and then you can figure out how to upgrade it, as opposed to being like the first ever, kind of version of something.
It's much harder to like create a market than to make a better mousetrap.
Yes.
We also at the time Slack was getting popular. We had used some of the predecessors like HipChat and FlowDoc, and so we kind of saw how like that was modernizing kind of text chat, and that was sort of an analogy to some extent to what we could bring to voice chat, but then do it in a way that was sort of tailored for gaming.
Right.
Like I remember some of the early press calls that I did when I was, initially we were bringing Discord to market, and some of the reporters looked at me and they were like, "This is just like Slack, with a different name and a dark theme." And I was like, "No, you're missing the point."
Right.
Like you're missing the point.
Like, how long did it take for investors to get what you were working on? Like, did they just respond to the traction, or did you actually find some investors early on that sort of,
I think they just
understood it?
Yeah, I think they just responded to traction. We raised money to build the game before that, and I think I was able to raise money back then to do that because I had previously had a successful startup.
Yes.
So kind of, coming off the tail of that successful company, I was able to raise money off of a vision and a pitch. That was still hard to raise. I mean, it was still hard to get enough capital to do that because games at the time were still like, can you really invest in games? And so our Series A was led by like the games guy at the time, Mitch Lasky from Benchmark did our Series A. And that was the thing I pitched him was game, chat app, distribution platform.
Right.
And that's the path that we've been on. So
right.
We didn't spend a lot of the money, and so we used the leftover capital from that to fund the initial version of Discord, and then maybe 6 months later raise the first Discord round.
And you just hinted at this, but you had a previous company that was successful and bought by Gree called OpenFaint. What were the things that you learned and did differently between the first two? Did you kind of set out with anything kind of different?
That previous startup also began as a game studio, and we pivoted to social tools for gamers.
It turns out this is a playbook.
Yeah. Or at least it's mine. And me and Stuart seem to. Yeah. There's three of these. That first company was really about the mobile. We launched a game the day the App Store opened in 2008. We were one of the first 50 titles in the App Store. It ended up not really working out, but we had technology in the game that we built, leaderboards, chat rooms, account login, friends list, that I thought would be useful for other developers. And at the time, my analogy was like Xbox Live for mobile. This was before Game Center. So we took out the tech and launched it as an open source, not open source, but like as an open SDK for developers. And that did really well. And so what I learned from that experience was really two things. And one relevant to what we're talking about here, which is pivoting. And the thing that I really took from that was when we were building the game, we got to a point where actually like we kind of were going to run out of money. And I remember calling my dad and being like, I think I'm gonna have to move back home because like this startup thing's not gonna work and I gotta get a new job. And I was probably 24 at the time or something. But we were sitting around and we had this insight around taking the technology out of the game and releasing it. But it was gonna take like 4 or 5 months to actually pull it out. We ended up actually rebuilding it. So what we did is we actually I made a bunch of fake screenshots in Photoshop, put up a web page, announced this thing in closed beta, got TechCrunch to cover it back when TechCrunch was a big deal. We took the mailing list of like I think it was 200 developers signed up, and we went and raised the bridge round on it with no product.
Amazing.
And then we built it and shipped it, and it worked.
Right.
And the lesson I took from that was a couple things. One is I would not have pivoted away from the game if we didn't run out of money. So when I was doing this company, I was like, I'm not going to run out of money this time because I raised a lot. So I've got to pay attention to see if there's another path, because the world's not going to force me to pivot this time.
Right.
So I was looking for a pivot. Not that I was trying to pivot, because it was really hard. We built the game, put a lot of passion into it, and it didn't work out, so we ended up pivoting. But I was like, I know that this can happen, and I've got to, like, my body is ready. If it comes to pass, I need to make sure that I see that. So that was probably like the biggest lesson. The second one was around culture and company culture. Now, I know I made a values joke before, but I do think probably around the time you get to 20 people, if you haven't thought about values, you probably want to sit down for a minute and write it down and figure out if you like what you see. Because at my last company, we got to like 100 people before we sold it and kind of left. And I remember around 80 people, one of the early employees, a good friend of mine, came to me and he was like, Jason, it sucks to work here. I just want you to know that.
Was it a Post-it note or was it?
No. He told me with love, and he's, we're still good friends, and he works at Discord now. But he was like, he was more like, it sucks to work here. Can we fix it? Can we work on it? Was kind of the point.
Nice.
But like when you're 80, 90 people, it's really hard to like really change the culture of a company. Right. Because the culture is like what happens when the founder's not in the room, basically. How are people behaving? It's about behavior. And it's really hard to change that when you have that many people, because there's so much happening, it's hard to redirect it and change it all in a dramatic way. So this time around, we were like, we're gonna be intentional about making this an amazing place to work for creative people, and really put it front and center, and made many decisions along the way that were really kind of about making sure that we were creating a good environment for people and not like just hammering people in ways that we didn't feel was appropriate. And I think that's played out.
There was a little bit of a thing back in the day where people would just be like, business model, like, don't need that. Let me go get, whatever X, 100 millions, billion, users. And only after that am I gonna think about, do I need to put like some banner ads over here or like, something like that. One of the things that maybe I've observed and would be very curious if you agree and how you think about business model, how you would recommend our founders think about business model, is that we may maybe just be outside of the period of time where consumers are just willing to try anything. And so because of that, it's actually kind of a pain in the ass to get them to try new products. And as a result of that, then, actually business model might be a good thing, because you might actually need to think of like, what does this business look like if it only has 20 million users or 50 million users, as opposed to naturally assuming you get to hundreds of millions or a billion, and then you kind of figure it out. I mean, I'm curious just how you think about all that now.
Yeah. Well, we did not take the approach of like get a billion people and then like we'll figure out how to make money later. Because the intention for Discord originally, like actually I never thought it would get as big as it is today. Like when I started it, I was like, if we get the whole market, we'll have 100 million monthly actives. That would be like complete slam dunk, game over, we win. And we're more than double that now. And so with that came the thought around, okay, we're not gonna have a 2 billion person consumer product, so how will we make money if we can get to 100 million monthly actives? And because we were very focused on gaming, I was trying to think through like, what is the right business model given that we're building a communications app for people who play games. So from the beginning, the plan was like, we can directly sell utility and expression, and then we will monetize games distribution somehow. That was from day zero for us. So like, I agree with your conclusion, to a large extent. I think if you're gonna have a product that has 1 billion users, there's just like only so many things that everyone's gonna use, and these billion user products, I think, have to have this like pretty, I want to say like least common denominator, because I don't mean that in like a negative way, but it has to just be extremely approachable, like something that like everybody can relate to, and then it's got to be better than the things they're doing now, especially if it's like an entertainment product.
Right.
So we always thought about Discord as more as a social utility, like a tool that was solving a problem for specific people, and we built it for them in that way. And we knew it was going to have to be kind of free to start, because communication products need to be free. Like if you want to have a group of 10 people, they've got to be able to use the product. But we also knew that in the world of games, like free-to-play games, people are used to and accustomed to this kind of like, like some power and some utility is paid. And people also expect to pay for games and stuff around games. And so the thought was that we would monetize it in that way. So I would encourage you to think about building a business from the beginning. But maybe, like anything, like your plans will change.
Yeah, I'm gonna go back to this like notion of targeting this pretty like maybe narrow seeming segment of gamers, and especially it was sort of like PC gamers, right? Because it's not like you're gonna chat while you're playing Candy Crush or something necessarily at the time in terms of how it was envisioned. Once you started with that segment, what were the clues that maybe the usage might be broader than that? And to what extent did you try to encourage that versus, there's always kind of the question of like, when do you kind of open up your second segment or your second or third geography or, kind of this expansion question. I'm curious how you guys tackled it at Discord.
Yeah, it was very organic for us, how this kind of played out. We designed the tool kind of, the archetypical initial customer set was like the World of Warcraft guild or the Final Fantasy 14 guild. In fact, when we launched it, we timed it with an expansion to the Final Fantasy MMO. Because we knew that when new expansions came out, that was a moment when people would look to rebuild, to bring their groups back together and look for new tools. So it was kind of a, adoption moment in that space. And what we realized pretty quickly was even though we focused on the Final Fantasy Heavensward users, like within 2 weeks, people were using it to play everything.
Right.
So originally I was like, okay, we're gonna go game by game and we're gonna make sure it works for people. And it turned out that actually the tool was homogeneous enough that people adopted it for Final Fantasy and then they would go play Rocket League. And then they would bring their Rocket League friends in and then they would go play, I don't know, Smash Brothers or something. And then right. It just sort of like spread pretty quickly. So we pretty quickly realized that it was covering all of multiplayer gaming. We also thought that this was like a better version of Internet Relay Chat, IRC. For those of you who remember what that is, internet chat rooms. And so as part of our go-to-market strategy, we were like reaching out to mods on Reddits, on subreddits, and we were like the gaming ones were like the Diablo subreddit and the Final Fantasy subreddit. We were like, hey, you have IRC links on your sidebar. Like you should replace those with Discord links because we think they'll be better for your users. And so very quickly we started with like gaming groups. That was our main focus. And then I thought that the Reddit chat rooms, the IRC replacement would kind of be a growth factor for us. And then we really quickly started seeing Twitch streamers using it. And so we basically saw people pulling it into different aspects of their lives. We leaned into it and made sure the tech worked and built tools for those people to make. And we would frequently, for like the first couple of years, every 6 months we'd have a bigger new kind of famous person entity thing launch a Discord server and it would like hit our infrastructure limits.
Right.
And it's real-time chat, so like it was made for 50 people, and then they're like, oh, there's 200 people and it's breaking. Okay, now there's 1,000 people. And now the latest biggest one is Midjourney has like 20 million people in a fucking chat room, which is it's chaos, but it works. So yeah, it was the market kind of pulled it out of us.
You just mentioned Midjourney, and there's also some of the Web3 communities, and there's also there's kind of these other aspects. How do you think about kind of building features to help you expand into some of those versus maybe like kind of this continual thing of like serving the core segment and kind of that balance, and it's so funny because it's like, I know, the very first time I used Facebook, like back in the day, like the facebook.com had features like you could share your like class syllabus and you could like click around and see what other people were doing at your college. I mean, it was really hyper oriented around that. And of course, over time they lost all those features and they removed the poke feature and they removed all these amazing features that I loved, as it kind of, got evolved. And so, yeah, like how do you think about that evolution of like leaning into the new thing versus the core?
This has been a learning experience for us, in kind of, I call it season 1 of Discord, like before COVID, we were very focused on gaming. And even though people would frequently use Discord for other stuff, we were kind of like, yeah, that's nice. Like, we're happy that that's happening. We're going to make sure it's not broken, but we're not going to really focus on it.
Yeah.
Because our intention was like, get all the gamers and then make money around distributing games. So like, if a bunch of people are on here to like talk about houseplants, like they're probably not going to buy games. So like, it sort of doesn't matter. But if it helps the gamers stay, that's fine. When COVID happened, the world got turned upside down and everybody was just like, we need a place to hang out online. And so it became actually kind of confusing at that time to think about how, when we're doing market, when we're trying to talk to people about what they like about our product and what they want, like the signals were all messed up, right?
Right.
And so we kind of made a series of decisions for a couple of years there where we went more mainstream and tried to make Discord more useful in sort of these, I call it general population use cases. And as COVID kind of ended and we looked back on what was resonating with people and where there was real usage and engagement, really like this gaming and gaming adjacent stuff continued really strong. People loved it. The gaming features we shipped got tons of adoption. And like the stuff that wasn't focused on gaming, just like kind of had less energy and excitement around it.
Right.
And so early last year, we decided, or early end of 2023, we decided to refocus back on our core of gaming. And that's kind of the push of the company now. And it's working well. And I think it's, it speaks to maybe my point earlier around like if you're going to build a general purpose app for mass market consumers, it really needs to be differentiated and better and easy in like a 10x way.
Right.
And for most people, if you're not into gaming stuff, the things that make Discord unique and amazing are actually, for people who love games, like actually kind of make it hard and difficult. And so, you know, we could like remove all that stuff to make it easier, but then it's not different and unique. And so like, you know, you win in business by being different and unique and over-serving a customer segment. And so we're like, okay, we love games. It's in our blood. We can eat and breathe it. We're gonna lean on that. And so the product strategy we took in the early days and we take now is one of what I call creative misuse, where we build these tools for people who play games. We build communication tools through the lens of how players need to organize and customize our app. And we try to do it in ways where you can do other things with it, but we prioritize and make decisions through the lens of being a gaming tool. So like, you know, for example, like Midjourney and all the Web3 stuff, you know, that exists on our platform because back when we launched in 2015, we knew that players were going to want to customize and connect Discord to external data sources.
Yep.
Like we had someone on the team who played this game called EVE Online. Deep cut here. It's an MMO space game where you get in these corporations, which are like groups of people. It's like hundreds of people, and you do these like space battles. Some people call it spreadsheets in space.
Sounds so fun.
Yeah, I mean, people who love it really love it.
Yep.
But anyway, so we knew that people were going to want to use Discord to coordinate in EVE, and that we were not going to go and build the data connectors to make sure that the right people in the corporation with the right rank get access to the right text channels. So we just built an API, and we're like, you can do it. And it turns out that same API could connect to the blockchain. And the same API could, like, you know, where we let you bring in EVE Online data sources and World of Warcraft data sources into Discord chat, can allow you to generate images off of text prompts. And so there's Midjourney. So like, we built Discord with this customization capability in it. And it just turned out that people who love the product like took it in all these different directions.
Say a little bit more about kind of what gave you guys the conviction to, you know, allow people to build on the Discord platform, given that also, you know, it's maybe functionality that's not in your control, and you know, there's all this hair that comes with, you know, building a platform, you know, product. So yeah, curious to hear about that.
Yeah, I mean, it's literally the next evolution of what I just talked about, right? So you know, we have this bots platform on Discord. It's used in, like, I don't know, close to 50 million people a month are interacting with these bots on Discord, and it's used in a variety of different things. You know, the Web3 stuff. The AI stuff is one, but also like moderation tools, and people build games and like all sorts of stuff. If you use Discord, you probably have a bot in your server. And what we just thought was like, it's limited to text. And wouldn't it be amazing if we could allow people to embed HTML5 experiences? And then we thought, okay, but we're doing everything through the lens of gaming. So what if we take the view of like, let's promote this in a way that it's like embedded games that you can play with your friends, that are instantly accessible, that come with a social graph. But if you want to do other things with it, that's fine. Right. So we've taken the lens of like of doing it in that way. So if you go to Discord today, you can click the Shapes button, and you'll see there are lots of games you can play in there. But there's also like a whiteboard. There's a YouTube experience, and then other bots are using it. Like I just saw a CS:GO, a Counter-Strike matchmaking summary tool where you interact with it in text chat, hit a button, and an iframe pops up, and you can look at a table of your data that's pretty, as opposed to seeing it embedded in text chat. So it's just like the next evolution of our platform, and you know, we're really excited to see what people come up with.
So you know, obviously there's a big, you know, everything that's happening in AI, and you know, I think what's interesting is you could make a bunch of arguments about how AI will be part of you know, a product like Discord. Tell us, like, you know, what are the areas you're most excited about? Like, what are some things you think might happen? You know, and as you think about like just, you know, incorporating AI into the Discord strategy.
So the way that I've come to think about AI is it's an enabling technology, right? Like, and I think sometimes, at least so the way I think about it is, look, fundamentally what people do when they use our service is they're talking and spending time with their friends and other people. And so I think about, how does AI help us deliver that value to people more effectively, or unlock new things that they can do together? And that's sort of like one pillar of it. So at some level, in a strange way, I think Discord is not actually that affected by AI. Like, a lot of communities are on the platform that are talking about AI, open source projects, building AI things, and that's all great. But fundamentally, the value we're providing is a really easy way to organize with people around stuff on the internet. And when you're like playing, you know, a game with your friends, fundamentally, you want to talk to your friend.
Right.
Right? So like, okay, how does AI help in that situation. So we have some prototypes of things that we're thinking about that like they're sort of like toys to like shitpost your friends and have fun, and how AI could help in that way. And then we think about other situations like, yeah, at some point you're gonna be able to go into a public community on Discord, and no matter what language it's in, it will be in your language, and whatever language you speak in, it will be in, you know, in that person's language. We see a lot of this in Europe where there'll be a server with people have, you know, everybody speaks different languages, but like everyone sort of defaults to English, but maybe a third of the people don't speak English that well. Well, wouldn't it be cool like if you spoke Spanish, it was just all in Spanish?
Right.
Like we could do it right now. It's just a cost question, right? And then you could extend that to voice chat. I'm talking to someone live, like I'm speaking in English, you're hearing it in Chinese, and like it's cool. So like that is gonna come to Discord. I imagine that will come to all communication products at some point. You know, Discord has this interesting challenge of like summarization where, or sort of you go to a community and it's like a bazillion chat messages and you're like, I'm not reading all this. So can we use summarization to help get the nuggets of value to you that are interesting? So these are some ways that we, just as an example of how we think about it, but fundamentally it's what is the value we're trying to create for people, and then how does AI enable it? We've debated, you know, like should we build virtual friends and this kind of thing. I don't know, we'll see. On one hand, you're like, it's gonna happen. But on the other hand, I'm like, is that now where I'm the old guy? Like, kids these days with their virtual friends, I don't know. But on the operations side, like you mentioned, customer service, like we are using AI all over the place inside the company.
Yes.
Every customer service ticket that comes in is seen by AI first, and we use the humans to escalate for the harder things. And surprisingly to me, like customer service scores went up because the answers are more often correct and the response time is instant. We just deployed Cursor to all of our engineers like 2 weeks ago. And so we're like, if you write code, thou shalt Cursor, and if you don't, like, figure it out or leave. Because I don't know, I'm so much more productive using AI co-piloting tools. So we're just like going through every function at the company and trying to figure out how do we make the current people we have 10, 20, 30, 50, 100%, you know, more productive with AI.
Well, amazing. We're so happy to have you. We saved the best for last.
Well, thank you all for staying. Appreciate your questions.
Speedrun program.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Yeah, we've talked about this one. I remember thinking like, oh, there's 10 ways we could make money, like at my last startup. And one of my mentors at the time was like, you think there's 10 ways because you actually don't know what you're doing. Cool. Cool. Oh, wow. Huh. Like, do I ask more questions or do we just keep with the question?
When Jason's ready to announce his next company.